Hello, Catholic Replies students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 2, Section 6, Judaism through a Catholic Lens. So as we go along, you need to jot down your notes, particularly the blue items that you see highlighted. So some similarities between Jews and Catholics. First of all, is our history. The history of Catholicism is really rooted within Judaism. We see, Abraham as our father in faith. So that's kind of where we begin here. We have a theology, meaning that we are both monotheistics. We believe in one God. Scripture, we accept the Ten Commandments kind of as a minimal guide for moral living. We also look at the Hebrew Bible, and for the most part, we accept a good portion of that as part of the Old Testament, though there is some slight differences that we'll mention here in a little bit. And finally, when we talk about the liturgy, the relation of the Passover to the Last Supper, particularly the blessings that you might see used at the Passover, but also blessings when you talk about the sharing of the Eucharist as well. Okay. Aside from that, there are some differences. And first point to talk about is the incarnation. That is talking about the the form of God becoming flesh in man, and that is Jesus. And it's in our capacity of understanding. Jews basically believe that God doesn't really have a physical form. But we as Christians and Catholics in general, we believe that Jesus became flesh through Mary, and thus Jesus is God in the flesh. Okay, Jews see no reason for a mediator between themselves and God. Each person has the power within themselves to reconcile and to make right with God. We believe that God became one of us and Jesus to bring about our salvation, to open up the gates of heaven for us, and to help us reconcile to God. And this is through that doctrine of the incarnation. For Jews, the Word became incarnate through the book, meaning the Torah in itself. And for us, for Christians in general, the Word became incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ. Okay. Another issue that we have some differences on is that of the Messiah. Both of us agree when we talk about Jews and Christians in general that Jesus was a historical figure. He was born of a Jewish woman named Mary, raised in a traditional Jewish home and in the Jewish homeland, was a charismatic preacher. He was a miracle worker. He also died as a criminal through crucifixion by the Romans around the year 30. How we differ is that the Jews don't see Jesus as the Messiah. They believe that the Messiah is yet to come. This Messiah is going to reestablish the house of David, and in a sense, will be kind of like David in the sense of a warrior. The coming of the Messiah will be the inauguration of God's reign on earth, kind of as the ruler. And we see, that is in terms of Jesus ruling not only here on earth, but also in heaven as well. So, differences when we talk about scripture, and these are kind of minor things. I mean, there's a lot that we have in common scripturally, but there are some differences. When we talk about the New Testament, Jews see the New Testament as kind of documents written at a certain point in time, but not necessarily part of sacred scripture for their worship. When we talk about the New Testament, this is the revealed scripture. This is pretty much what all Christians believe in. By the first century, Jews did not accept the New Testament as something being revealed by God. The Deuterocanonicals, that would be the second canon or the 7 books that are found in the Bible, only in the Catholic Bible, but not in the Jewish canon, would be part of that. Okay, Christians commonly believe that the Old Testament is the same as the Hebrew Bible, but when we talk about the differences between Roman Catholics and other Protestants, it's these 7 books that really sets us apart when we talk about the beliefs. So like First and Second Maccabees, Judith, Tobit, Barak, Sirach, Wisdom, all are a part of the second canon. And when you look at the liturgy, these are books that we do take readings from, particularly like the first reading, sometimes the second reading. Anyway, the word testament, this means covenant. Jesus didn't enter into human history to render the Old Testament void. He came to reveal himself as the Messiah, the Son of God, to help us, be able to kind of deal with the original sins that we had seen in the Old Testament, to rectify those so that we could be united with God in heaven. So some challenges that you're going to see between Jews and Christians in general. There has been a troubled history over time, and some of this has to do with some issues as far as dialogue, not necessarily um, listening and acting upon uh, some of our differences very fairly. Jews have faced discrimination, violence, expulsion from countries, deportations out of countries, death at the hands of people claiming to be Christians, through things like the burning of synagogues and sacred text, which you might have heard about like during the Crusades or pogroms. Sometimes, the claim of Jews being Christ killers has been unfairly lobbed at Jews. They have been discriminated against because they didn't accept Jesus. They have been forced to convert. All these things are not necessarily fair, let alone, someone having to give their life for these differences. When we talk about the Second Vatican Council and the doctrine of Nostra Aetate, um, the church kind of goes about trying to right some of the wrongs towards Jews. And we talked about this a while back, but before Vatican II, Pope John the 23rd did cut out of the Latin text for the Good Friday service some words that, for the most part, were really kind of meant as a kind of a slam against the Jewish people. Jews, for the most part, were and remain God's chosen people. I think, if you look at the church, this is something that they firmly believe in. God never severed the covenant that was made to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai. There's no collective guilt for Jews for the death of Jesus. That's stated within, our catechism. Roman soldiers who crucified Jesus at the, extenuation of some, not all of the Jewish leaders. So for the most part, the blame falls on the Romans, as far as the death of Christ. Jews do not need to become Catholics to be saved. When the time comes, when uh, we see the second coming of Christ coming to earth, it is believed that that will all be revealed at that time. The Catholic Church no longer has an organized ministry program or missionary program set out to convert Jews. Other issues, when we talk about anti-Semitism, it does still linger in society. Jews find it hard to hear Jesus as the source of salvation. Catholics find it painful to hear that Jews cannot accept Jesus. And the cross, in the form of Christianity, might be seen as a sign of God's unconditional love for us, but Jews may see it as a sign of human hatred, and hence that can be a real challenge. All right, thank you very much.